What is up, guys? Today on the Football Guys Dynasty Football Show, we're diving into the free agency preview, assessing the value of guys without contracts in 2024. We have hit kind of the dead period of Dynasty. This December, these next 3 weeks are going to be a little rough, but we got topics for you, and we're going to be diving in for value and exposure there. We're going to be talking about like outlook, and I know some of you guys don't have Dynasty trade the deadline, so we will talk about kind of trade value out there. We'll be getting through it all, but I think it's fun to kind of address and look at the free agency, what's upcoming. It's December. As soon as it gets into January, we're going to start knowing these guys. First up that we're going to talk about is Michael Pittman Jr. And Michael Pittman Jr., he's been solid this year. Wide receiver 11 overall, 16.8 fantasy points per game in PPR as of right now in terms of the stats. We've seen him get his, almost a 29% target share this year with Minshew under center. So we've seen that. We like that. They have Josh Downs there as well. He's kind of turned heads a little bit with his play. He's kind of been inconsistent, but we'd expect Pittman to get re-signed, like at least franchise or something. So probably franchise tagged, or if not re-signed, I think they're going to make it a priority to go get him. What is your expectation with Pittman with Anthony Richardson, Jeff? Like let's say he does get re-signed overall, I don't think they're going to let him just walk out the door. Do we think that he can kind of duplicate this next year with Richardson?
I do believe that. We've seen that. We saw that early in the season. This offense is really flowing through Pittman, and he's one of the higher volume players in the NFL right now. The Colts have plenty of cap space. The Colts are in a really interesting position because they have the fourth most cap space coming into next year, $74 million. And yes, they gave Jonathan Taylor that big contract, but when you look at the rest of their key skill position, at least, Anthony Richardson is on that rookie quarterback deal that everybody wants to get for the next 5 years. You've got Zach Moss is going to be a free agent. That could open up some space, whether they bring him back or not. He's not going to be a big demand. But Josh Downs is on the rookie deal. Alec Pierce is on the rookie deal. That's really the only receivers they play. Pittman, Downs, Pierce is about how deep they go. And then all those tight ends that they have as well, Kylan Granson, Will Mallory, all those guys are on their rookie deals as well. So I think they're really set up. It's interesting. They're in a great position to retain Pittman, and I think that he plays well with Anthony Richardson's strengths right now, especially that intermediate game. Anthony Richardson worked well in that area with Pittman previously, and so I would expect him to be retained, but this franchise could go out there and add significant talent, probably as another wide receiver if that becomes available.
Yeah, I think that's something. I think what they're going to do is add to the defensive side because they have all of these rookie contracts, like you mentioned. At least franchise tagging Pittman is a no-brainer to me, just with how productive he's been, with how unproblematic he's been, and that's kind of rare for some big name wide receivers, and he's kind of turning himself into a big name wide receiver. We've talked about knowing scheme and things like that. The Shane Steichen offense very much so runs through their X wide receiver. They run through the primary, and so that was always a bit of a concern with Josh Downs. But Michael Pittman has really flourished this year. I do think that Anthony Richardson is going to come back next year, be improved as a passer. I think this time off probably is going to end up being good for this offense in the long run, and I'm really excited to see what that duo is going to be able to do long term. Because from a dynasty perspective, this is one of those young wide receivers that it feels like a really good offseason target before he gets tagged, because everyone will be kind of skeptical that they will retain him and unsure of his situation and things like that. So, yeah, I'm excited for this.
I don't want to say it, but I'm gonna. I wrote an article last year about this offense and their ability to go through their wide receiver one with A.J. Brown. And I talked about A.J. Brown possibly being kind of that top 5 guy. That's how I look at with Pittman in this offense too. Like, I don't know if he's ever going to get that top 5 level, but they definitely do. That's why Christian's point's so good, is they do run it through that first read offense. Those type of things they like to do is Pittman. This is Pittman's zone and what they like. And I'm all aboard there. Do you guys feel comfortable? Like, where are you at in terms of value though? For a late first, you still leaning Pittman, Jeff?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm at the point now where I'm holding my first. I don't love giving up.
Oh, I get that. Just straight up right now, like no context involved though. Like, let's say you're a contender, you need a wide receiver. Your wide receivers, you're looking at that value, and you have good running backs. But would you be willing to give up something that's like 109 and 112 if you don't have a deadline for Michael Pittman down the stretch?
If I convince myself that Michael Pittman is what I need to win the championship this year, then I would explore that deal. I really like what Pittman has done this year quite a bit.
Yeah. I mean, another interesting deal that I just saw in here, but Michael Pittman for Jordan Addison in a second. I think that's interesting in terms of what side, depending on what you think of there. Where you're at with that one, Christian?
I mean, I think it's Pittman, right? I think adding the second it makes it closer, but I value Pittman as a near wide receiver one
Yeah.
in Dynasty. So a near top 12. I think I have him at 16 in my latest update, but that's probably too low, when factoring in what I now believe is his long term outlook. So I just think Pittman's kind of shown that he can go out there and score a ton of fantasy points. And Addison had a nice little stretch there, but I think he's always going to be secondary. And we talked about the concern with the quarterback position in Minnesota next year. And I think it's easily Pittman on that side.
I want everybody to clock it. It was 3:50. Kevin gave me some gruff pre-show that he was gonna every single time I said I wrote an article, and Kevin made it 3 minutes and 50 seconds. So we do have that going on. But before we go and move on, first we want to tell you, Football Guys is finding a way to give back this holiday season. From December 11th to December 15th, Football Guys is donating 20% of new premium subscriptions sold directly to St. Jude's Children's Hospital. This is your chance to get all the expert insight, tools, and resources that Football Guys Premium offers while supporting an incredible organization. Don't miss this opportunity. Sign up for Football Guys Premium subscription between December 11th and 15th and help make a difference. Let's show what the fantasy football community can do when we can work together. Check out the link in our podcast description to learn more and get started.
All right, and before we move on, make sure you take a moment, like this video, subscribe to the channel here at YouTube, or make sure you leave any comments, questions, or trades you have on the topics. Where do you think some of these guys will go? Do you think Pittman will kind of get franchise tagged? If you do you have him in that wide receiver, one range, low end run range, wherever you're at with him? We're going to jump over to Mike Evans. So Mike Evans has had a pretty good year, guys. People left him for dead heading into the season. He was probably on every sell list out there. Wide receiver 8, averaging about 18.5 fantasy points per game. I know he had a lackluster performance this last week. One catch, 6 yards, I think it was, or 8 yards. But outside of that, he's been a top 12 guy pretty consistently, even with Baker Mayfield at that position. When we think about what he's going to be moving forward. So first, I guess, Jeff, do we think he's moving on? Do you think that he's going to find a new team?
I'm of the belief that he is. I think maybe we said it even last week that I think he's a Ring of Honor type player for the Buccaneers. I think they get a deal done. They keep him around coming off this really strong season. And I think that they explore a deal for Chris Godwin if they were to move off of one of these receivers. I just think you're in a better position for what Mike Evans has really meant to that fan base to keep him around. But then also having Chris Godwin under contract, a little bit younger asset, a little bit probably higher value trade market, that if you did want to move on from a receiver, you can trade him for some draft capital, reset, and keep Mike Evans as your primary, because he has been the primary this year.
Yeah, I agree. I think we did say that. It was either last week or the week before, but Mike Evans certainly seems like a guy that they want to keep around. And I think part of what the hang up was they know what happens to older receivers, and Mike Evans went out there and said, no, it's cool. Like I'm still really good. So you guys can pay me now. And I think that that's what's going to happen. There are a lot of fun trade scenarios for Chris Godwin. I do think that he'll return a lot of value. And this is a team that has an opportunity to kind of move forward with Mike Evans as their one. I do like some of their young pieces at wide receiver. They might not have to replenish right away. They might be able to attack some of those other positions. So from a dynasty perspective, though, Mike Evans still, he's creeping up there in age. We've talked about his value quite a bit on this show. I'm curious to see what the overreaction is by dynasty managers when he gets like a 3-year, $18 million a year deal, which isn't massive money, but it's not anything to scoff at either. I wonder if maybe people invest a little too heavily considering his age, and the decline has to come soon, right?
JJ Zacharyson, JJ Zacharyson did a very interesting. He does a great pod. He does these short episodes, and he talked about, it was last summer I heard it, and he talked about when a player's dynasty value starts to decline, there is no bounce back. There's no rebound once you get to a veteran stage, and so I think that while we've seen a great season from Evans, I think you're going to step right back into the climate that we had last year with Evans, where everybody was just, there was no real reason outside of just being afraid of Baker Mayfield to be so off of Mike Evans last year. I think you're going to see it again, where in the offseason, people are always just going to be afraid with these receivers. If you flash back to Larry Fitzgerald, there was a stretch where Larry Fitzgerald was still putting up 1,000, 1,200, 1,500 yard type seasons into his mid 30s. And there was one random year where his redraft ADP dropped to like wide receiver 25 or something like that, or 30 or something like that. And it was because it was like his age 34, age 35, and people just were off of him. And I think he turned one of his best seasons there. And I think it's just the nature in the offseason, especially the Dynasty, how Dynasty is so hyper focused on youth in the offseason, trying to win that roster beauty pageant. I think that you're kind of going to see Mike Evans, as long as he produces, you might get a little bit of climb in the season and then a drop, and it bounces up and down in the season versus out of the season, but you're just never really going to recover, I think, from where Mike Evans would be.
Yeah, I mean, when you're looking at his targets that he has this year, I think he's going to have maybe the second most targets he's had in his career. He's not going to reach that 2016, his third season, we had 173, but I think he's going to push the 148. I think he's going to be close. I think with where you're seeing it, I know last game kind of skews that a little bit, but I mean, he's produced there. I think he's in the purgatory stage, though. I think he's a second round value, and no one's going to want to give up him for a second round because of the production that he sees. So I think that is tough there. But just in a vacuum, 2-year window, who would you rather have, Christian? Mike Evans or Rashee Rice?
Rashee Rice, I think, even though I'm skeptical that he's still the number one for Kansas City next year.
But I think that's tough, right? Because Rashee, we're banking on that. Okay, he's going to take that next step. He's a wide receiver 1. But are they going to retool that position? And because I just say that because I saw like 4 deals go straight up. Mike Evans for Rashee Rice. If that's the value, where are you at? I mean, that's kind of what you have to think of in 2 years. Do you think Mike Evans can not get injured, not get that hammy? Don't get that hammy, Mike Evans, where you're out for a few weeks and then you're concerned about it. All right, next guy, T. Higgins. We talk about T, like, I feel like every week. Expected to maybe get franchise tagged, but if not, he is the clear-cut wide receiver run for every single person out there they talk about. T. Higgins is coming to this team. What is your expectations for T, Jeff?
I think he's going to get a contract done, to be honest with you. And I know that Joe Burrow's new deal is going to be kicking in. But, I've looked at this situation before, and it's especially interesting the last couple of weeks. What we're seeing from Chase Brown, I think, could be a real key in the T. Higgins situation, because Chase Brown has some serious juice on the NFL field that has showed up over the last 2 weeks. He had a 54-yard touchdown this past week. He looks very strong. And so they can cut Joe Mixon after this year. They reworked his deal coming into this year. They can cut Joe Mixon. He's got an $8.5 million cap number. They can cut that off. They can save $5.7 million. They can let Tyler Boyd walk. That is a cap number at 10.3. And then T. Higgins' cap number this past year on his last year of his rookie deal was $4 million. So you add that all together, you're at $20 million. And so that is a real good, strong starting point for kind of allowing Mixon to move on, naturally moving Tyler Boyd on, and giving a deal to T. Higgins that starts around that 20 million number and kind of has that type of cap number. I think Andre Yosivas has played very, very well, and I think that he can step into that Tyler Boyd role. Charlie Jones, if they like him still, and you could either draft another receiver or draft another running back to complement Chase Brown, but move forward in that direction. You've built your organization this way to value Joe Burrow, to value Jamar Chase, and to value T. Higgins as the primary components for your title window. And while T. Higgins is still in the prime of his career, I know he had a disappointing year this year, but so did Joe Burrow, to be honest with you. And so while T. Higgins is in the prime of his career, you just don't allow these players to walk. That's just not how NFL teams function.
Also worth noting that while all of that could happen, the Boyd and the Mixon and things like that, they are starting with the 6th most space next year. They have the room to sign T. Higgins as it stands. It would just be, I think, clearing more to remain competitive, because that team has some holes right now. And I do feel like they have a Super Bowl window here because they've kind of shown it. They've been in 2 AFC championships in the last, 2 years, right? So probably not getting there this year. I don't know. But I do think that, like Kevin said last week, I think now is a perfect time to sell T. Higgins, with a lot of dynasty managers expecting he will go be the wide receiver one. We talked about him as maybe a hold, but I started to kind of think about it a little bit. I kind of think now, if you do it now, you're going to maximize that value, because I think that his ceiling is limited from Chase and limited from what that offense wants to be. But B, if we're all expecting him to remain a Bengal, that wide receiver one production might never be there. And so we might just know who T. Higgins is, and maybe he has some spike years as he develops in this offense and as this offense develops. But I just think with how he's viewed in the dynasty community and probably in your leagues, I think this could be a good time to move off of T. Higgins.
Let's work on some hypotheticals here, because if you want T. Higgins to move on, all right, so the Titans are going to have the most cap space. That doesn't make you feel better that T. Higgins is a Titan versus being a Bengal. The Commanders are next, and I just don't imagine they go in that direction. Then you've got the Patriots. You don't feel better about T. Higgins being a Patriot than being a Bengal, unless maybe they get Caleb Williams and maybe you go there. I think the Panthers have been talked about quite a bit, him being a Carolina guy. Do you feel better about T. Higgins being with Bryce Young at this point in time than being with Joe Burrow? I mean, I don't. I think Texans have been tossed out there because they had money. I don't imagine the Texans go in that direction given what they've seen from Tank Dell and Nico Collins this year. So it's really, I mean, the Cardinals might be looking at Marvin Harrison Jr. I don't know that they go that way either. And so I think when you run it down, it's a pretty good spot to be with Joe Burrow. And if Jamar Chase were to miss any time, then yeah, you do have that wide receiver one ceiling.
I think the only team that would definitely shoot his value up would be the Chiefs. If they made a splash there, I think that would be like okay, dang it, I jumped the gun on the window, but I don't know. I do think that when you're looking at overall those teams, yeah, I mean, we talked about the Texans before, but we've mentioned I have a hard time seeing them go that route with all the holes that they have, especially on the offensive line, where they got to kind of shift up. So I think that just to put in context what Christian's talking about too, a contending team lost Herbert. They traded a late first projected and T. Higgins for Dak Prescott down the stretch. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay if you need a quarterback, you're going to go for it. The way Dak has been playing, he's been playing like a top 10 guy. You go for that window. I do think that you can maximize T. Higgins by having another asset there. So yeah, I agree with your scenarios. I agree with the contracts and the status of all these guys. But there's not a lot of team fits where I'm like, that's better than Joe Burrow and the Bengals. And I think that's what we're kind of getting at.
So one team that I think is a kind of a dark horse to do it, if the Lions lose Ben Johnson, I think that they might be one of those teams that goes out to try to get another weapon, because I think they're kind of anchored down by their quarterback at this point. Yeah. I think we've seen some bad play from him, and so getting as many pieces around him. That said, I think, like we said, we expect him back in Cincinnati. I don't expect Cincinnati to allow him out the door, because Joe Burrow has publicly said he wants T. Higgins to remain in the building, and you want to keep your franchise quarterback happy. So it's probably all moot, but worth mentioning.
All right, let's jump over to Kirk Cousins. So I think in Superflex, especially in Dynasty, these kind of veteran quarterbacks are cheap right now, extremely cheap, and even they will be cheap this offseason. I know he has an injury there. He's coming off, obviously that, but I don't see the way the Vikings feel like he's going to be the bridge guy no matter what. I have a scenario where it's oh no, Kirk Cousins is coming back. He'll be that bridge guy. He can, maybe he just figure out Aaron Rodgers' doctor, and he'll just come back before anybody can ever come back. And that's something that he's looking at there. In terms of value, I mean, he's getting shipped right now for Joe Flacco for contenders. And if you can get a Kirk Cousins for the carcass of Joe Flacco out there, you do it. You stash it. I've had a lot of questions about Kirk Cousins being available in one quarterback dynasty leagues on the waiver wire. Yeah, you stash them. You look at your roster cloggers, you find one, then you go get them. There's ways to kind of maneuver and do those things, because I do think that he's valuable there. Kirk Cousins for Baker Mayfield straight up. These are deals that if you need to, you can stack a Kirk Cousins, who was top 5 guy before he got injured. He was looking having a career year in that offense. I think it predicates him well. I think with the weapons around him, I have a feeling he comes back to Minnesota. That's my belief. I think they signed him to kind of a team-friendly deal, knowing that, hey, 2 years, and then we'll kind of look for a guy. Jeff, where are you leaning with Kirk?
I think it's, you look at it in being in the contract year that he is in with the injury, you feel bad for him because he didn't get an opportunity to potentially walk in healthy off a strong year. But on the other side of that coin, the Vikings have experienced life without Kirk Cousins this year. And I think that is probably a pretty stark wake up call to, while they thought that maybe to go out there, maybe Cousins isn't able to push them over the finish line. They definitely know that it's probably not going to be Jaron Hall, Josh Dobbs, or Nick Mullins at this point, and Kirk Cousins is probably looking pretty good to them at this point.
My ideal scenario for the Vikings is that they just clean break with Kirk Cousins and they send everything they possibly have to get Caleb Williams or Drake May. Maybe here's the thing. I think this team could very much so be in range because I think they're going to miss the playoffs based on what we've seen in the last couple of weeks. And so I think when you start to get in that like 10 to 14 range, you can come up with a scenario where they can get up there. Now, the struggle that I have with that is I do not think the Chicago Bears will make that deal and keep one of those two quarterbacks in the division. And so it would have to be a different trade partner. But I do think that this is the time to get aggressive. This is my belief in how GM should build is you should be getting a quarterback when you don't necessarily need one. That could be framed as this case because I think Kirk Cousins could come back in a given scenario, but they would choose to move off of him in that scenario. But yeah, I mean, if he comes back, that's cool. There are also about 14 NFL teams that could use his services.
Yeah.
And so, like Kevin said, good stash right now. I think good throw in some deals as well. If I'm a contender, I consider sending like a pick for Kirk Cousins and just bolstering my team now because I think this value will shoot back up once he gets healthy and once we know when he'll be back.
The frustrating thing is Trey Lance was sitting right there, and they could have given up a fourth. And I mean, hindsight's 2020, and maybe Dallas would be in this situation. Dak Prescott's injured, and you're seeing Trey Lance play. But gosh, that would have been way more fun if you would have had Trey Lance to plug in there and just really see what you could have from Trey Lance. And obviously Justin Jefferson missed time, but to put him in there and have a good idea that whether or not you can move forward with that.
Yeah. All right. Let's jump over to Calvin Ridley. So let's talk about him. Up and down year this year. There's been flashes of that wide receiver one talent and inconsistencies there. I think the one thing that we note about Calvin Ridley. So let's talk about some things that maybe people don't know about. So Jacksonville sent a 5th rounder to Atlanta for that. Now, if they don't re-sign Ridley, the Jaguars give up a 3rd round pick. Now, that's assuming he finishes at a 60% snap rate, but he should finish there. If Jacksonville re-signs Ridley, they give up a 2nd round pick. I think that comes into play when you're thinking of what they're going to do because they already kind of sunk, in terms of that 3rd round is already a sunk cost. Now you're going to sacrifice another round for Ridley, who, I don't know, he's 3rd in the club behind Evan Ingram, Christian Kirk in terms of like production. I know Kirk's been out and he'll probably jump there. He's 29, right? Like there's markets out there. Maybe Jacksonville goes after, T. Higgins or these guys that we've been talking about. They have the cap space. Maybe they look at it and say, hey, you know what? I don't want to give up a 2nd. Let's go maybe sign a guy and kind of replace that production there. I'm weary of Ridley. I was always kind of weary of him anyway. Like I don't have him on a lot of rosters. I've traded him anyway when he kind of hit that peak value. But where are you? I know you like him, Jeff. I know you have liked him in the past. Where are you at with Ridley in terms of what is his situation going in? Because I think he's the toughest one to hit.
There's another layer on top of that too, because if you let him walk, you potentially get a comp pick back for him. So you're looking at getting a comp pick, like maybe even that could be a sandwich 3rd round pick, plus not giving up a 3rd, keeping your or plus not giving up a 2nd, keeping your 3rd. Yeah. So really it's a wash. I mean, if it and you can decide to go that direction. We talk about T. Higgins to the Chiefs. Ridley stands as the Chiefs guy to me. Just kind of to go out there to just kind of say at that point in his career, I think he's aware enough to know what he really wants out of that. And I think if the Chiefs want to be aggressive on and look and get a target for Patrick Mahomes, it does seem like Calvin Ridley would fit their scheme pretty well, what they need.
Mm-hmm. I think he's a Patriot. I think the Patriots are going to fix everything that they've done over the last few years this offseason by dumping a ton of wide receivers or a ton of money into wide receivers and offensive weapons. They're clearly going to have a new quarterback. That's Yeah, I also think that in my scenario where the Vikings go up and get one of the top 2 quarterbacks, I think Kirk Cousins makes some sense as the Patriots quarterback. I think that going that route instead of a rookie might be something Bill Belichick wants to do if he's still around. I'm not sure if he will be, but I think Calvin Ridley goes there, gets a ton of opportunity. I know the Patriots seem like a bad landing spot right now, but I do think that they will learn from their mistakes over the last couple of years. And I think anywhere where you can go get maybe 12 targets a game sounds pretty nice. And with the current state of that roster, that seems pretty feasible.
He's getting 12 targets a game. He's just catching 5 of them right now.
That's true.
The problem I have with Ridley is like I think he's unmovable in Dynasty almost. Like I just don't like if you have him, you definitely bought him probably at like peak value, or like maybe you bought on the dip when he was betting, like, and you got out. But like I understand that. But even then, like you should have sold way earlier. I mean I saw him go straight up for Jameson Williams. I don't know. Either side on that one. Like I'm like, I guess. And that's I think where the value shift is. It's really tough in terms of like, where do you rank that? He's probably a second. But I don't know if I'd give up a second in the 24 class for Calvin Ridley, like especially with the wide receiver class. And if some of these quarterbacks push that talent down, if it's a mid-second, you could be missing out on some wide receivers that would kind of retool that position. We kind of reshuffle. And then now I don't want Calvin Ridley on this roster. So I think it's kind of a tough one. I think he's the toughest one of this group that we talked about. Like Ridley is to me the toughest dynasty asset right now if you have him. All right, Derrick Henry. Never going away. Our man Derrick Henry is going to be playing in the league until he's going to be Adrian Peterson, still looking for jobs out there. Overall, even though he's, people have kind of, been back and forth with him, running back 7 overall. I mean, he's looked really good the last 2 weeks, 14.7 points per game. He's had 2 20-point outputs in PPR. He's probably going to find a new home. I guarantee he's going to go there. Who ponies up for Derrick Henry, Jeff? What do you think?
Nobody ponies up for Derrick Henry.
Well, I mean, like pony up for a veteran running back, so like $2-3 million a year. Like who's doing that?
Philadelphia. I think you look at what they need out of that running back position. I think they don't use the position in the passing game at all. I mean, the goal line is kind of covered by the tush push. I think when you look at the physicality that is involved in their offense, to add Derrick Henry in there, and if you're Derrick Henry, you're looking at that saying, the only reason why to continue playing at this point is to win a championship. And so I think that narrows your list down pretty quickly. And Philadelphia stands as a great landing spot there if that's your goal.
I wouldn't rule out a Titans return. We talked about Mike Evans and a Ring of Honor scenario. I think Derrick Henry falls into that category as well, as just a guy that I think Vrabel really likes and wants to keep around. And I know that Tyjae Spears fans are not really going to like that, and rightfully so. But I think that that's the most realistic outcome. There are certain teams that are very much so hampered by the cap. Now, obviously, you can work your way around that. But like I was thinking Cowboys make some sense with how they've wanted to run the ball and haven't been able to as much this year. I think that that's a nice fit, but they have to do some cap gymnastics to kind of get there. So other than that, I mean, I guess maybe the Ravens would be another good fit, but I think they're comfortable with their speedy running backs, and we'll talk about. We might get to their running back situation and what that looks like moving forward. But yeah, I think a Titans return. I do want to mention. I think Derrick Henry's a pretty decent add if you're a contender right now, because I think he still has some juice. I have tried to write this guy off for like 3 straight seasons, just saying there's no way this is sustainable. And it turns out it is sustainable for crazy athletes like Derrick Henry. So
he's going to finish second in the league in rushing yards. I mean,
on a terrible team.
And unlike guys like we've seen in the past, like Leonard Fournette and those guys, Henry, he's just, I don't want to say built different, sound like a boomer, but like he is just like his production, his ability to kind of do the things he's been able to do are second to none. No one really. Like Adrian Peterson's the last guy we've seen like this that consistently puts out these numbers and does that. I love the Cowboy spot. I think that's a Jerry move all day. And I think, with Tony Pollard and the question marks surrounding him, I do think, that's a fun spot. There are a ton of running backs still in free agency. So we got to get through some of these guys and kind of talk about them before we get out of it. We don't need to talk about tight ends, but Josh Jacobs, He is done. He's been done since week 1. He is not. He's mailed this thing in. He is like, hey, I'm just not getting injured. I want to get paid, and you can kind of tell that through his play there. So I guess the question is with these free agent running backs coming up. So we have Josh Jacobs. Let's just talk about them all. Then we got Saquon Barkley. He's out there. Tony Pollard is also out there. Austin Eckler, and then DeAndre Swift. And then we have Derrick Henry, who you just mentioned. So we have a bunch of like these running backs. Now, these are all prime candidates, in my opinion, for dynasty players to really be ready and see, kind of pounce before they sign. Like, hey, who you go out there, who do you trust, who you can get at the least amount of value, like a Mixon last offseason because of the cut stuff, where you can really kind of, enhance your window for contending. But if you had to pick one guy, Christian, so let's kind of just go through, and we'll talk about more, but one guy, who are you looking forward to? Who do you think can find a new home? Like, who are you concerned about in dynasty? You can go anywhere out. The floor is yours on this one.
I think Josh Jacobs to the Texans makes a ton of sense. And is that what you're going to say?
Yes. Yes. I love it.
Yeah. So Josh Jacobs to the Texans makes just way too much sense to me. And so that's a guy that I think I've been super high on in Dynasty. I've fluctuated a little bit. I think, he's always remained inside my top 6 to 7 in Dynasty rankings. But when you talk about what his potential output could be in an explosive offense, that's one thing we haven't seen from the Raiders and really a while. Last year, he was the only offense, it felt like at times, when they were just dumping the ball down to him all the time. This year, it's been a bit different. But I think when you get him into a situation where he could score 10 plus touchdowns, we're looking at a potential number 1 overall running back over the course of a season. And so I think that's the one guy that I'm super interested in from this group. I will say too, if Josh Jacobs isn't the one that goes there, I do think that they will make a play for one of these other bigger name guys, DeAndre Swift. I don't think Saquon's leaving New York, but Jacobs is the one that I'm still very much so into, and I'm going to try to add to all of my rosters as soon as I can once the season ends, after I win all my championships, hopefully.
What do you think, Jeff? Where are you going with this one?
Man, I really like that call, and now I'm looking at this.
Now it's out there. It's Christian's call now. You can't steal it either. Like, you can't be like, oh yeah, it was mine. Christian just said.
Well, I was going to go a different direction and mention, Bobby Slowick seeing the impact that Christian McCaffrey having on the 49ers offense and bringing them up a level and adding that pass catching. But Jacobs has been able to be a pass catching back in the past. I'm going to go. Let's talk about DeAndre Swift, and let's maybe piggyback off of one of Christian's ideas about the Patriots splashing the pot a little bit to add some talent. And you look at DeAndre Swift coming in there and kind of having Ramondre Stevenson being that physical back. The Patriots, I think, are a team that really, really want to use the running back in the passing game. That is a skill set we know that DeAndre Swift has. He's not being utilized in that area in Philadelphia. They could look and add Swift, and I know that Bill Belichick, if he's still there, has always loved those Georgia, those Alabama, those SEC running backs. Swift is in that mold. Swift could come in there and kind of be that evolutionary. They always had James White for years, but that guy to really be that safety blanket back to complement along with Ramondre Stevenson and kind of whatever rookie they end up with, help support that rookie. And so I think that would be an interesting pairing.
I thought you were going to say, DeAndre Swift, Bobby Slowick sees a CMC type rise in him. But it's okay. I understand where you're at. No, I think Swift is fine. Like, I think he's a running back 2 value veteran that you can go grab. I think down the stretch this season, he's kind of worn down a little bit for Philadelphia. Like, and they, Philadelphia really needs, I know this is a very weird tangent, Rashad Penny. Like, they kind of need him. Like, they need like this type of back like him, but they just don't have it there. I like that call there. I know that's going to be a shocker for most. Tony Pollard is who I want to talk about. So I think he's going to move on. I've never been a huge Tony Pollard fantasy value guy. I think, with the emergence of Rico Dowdle, some of these other guys, I mean, Jeff talked about a long time ago about stashes. Like, I think, Pollard's gone after this year. I have a hard time seeing the Cowboys bring him back. All reports, everything that we see there, unless his price gets super low where they're like, yeah, you want to come back, which I don't know if Pollard's necessarily going to do because I think they're upset. He's upset they ended up franchising him and how that played out. But I do think that if Pollard finds himself as a 1-2 punch again, I think he's valuable again. So when you see where his depth chart, where he lands, if he can be that pass catching, explosive guy next to Zeke, I think that he's going to be a very, very solid buy this offseason. And so I would preemptively go get that. Like, I would preemptively go buy Tony Pollard if I could, because I do think if he lands in a role in an offense, a scheme, I was trying to look at the scheme. These guys are better at scheme than I am in terms of like what makes the most sense for him. But I do think that, when you're going overall, like, I like the fact that if they can pair him with somebody else, kind of have that 1-2 guy. I mean, maybe Arizona brings a couple more guys in. They retool that offense and they have like a Tony Pollard type in that offense. I think pass catching, especially with Kyler there, like, look and see where he lands is fun. Do it beforehand. But I do think if he's that 1-2 guy, I like Tony Pollard a little bit more than I ever have. Like, I do think that if he finds a role for him, I'd be more excited there.
A quick dart, Austin Eckler to the Chiefs. That when you look at the Chiefs with McKinnon, I know that Christian thinks Austin Eckler is completely done, but I think to add a receiving back to complement Isaiah Pacheco and Eckler kind of just take it as going for a championship there, I think that could be an interesting one.
Can I also mention, so we didn't get to the J.K. Dobbins, A.J. Dillon tier here. A.J. Dillon to the Jets to eat up all of those yards that Breece Hall allegedly can't. Go in there, let Breece Hall be Aaron Jones. Literally, you have Aaron Rodgers next year. Just run the Packers offense that they ran where Aaron Rodgers was an MVP and get the exact player that you had. I think that makes a ton of sense. And I do think that the Packers value Dillon, and I don't think the rest of the league probably will value him, except maybe the Jets. So that's why I mentioned that as a potential.
Yeah. Other guys on this list, Hunter Henry, Dalton Schultz, Gerald Everett. I think I've been age limit on this show here. Odell Beckham Jr. He's going to be a free agent. Tyler Boyd, Kendrick Bourne, Darnell Mooney, and then Gabe Davis. Oh, I bet Jeff cannot wait until Gabe Davis is off the Bills roster over there. Any last the guys you want to touch on, Jeff, before we get out of here on the YouTube?
No, I mean we ran through that's the free agent class. I think that when you're looking at it, so I'm good.
I have one off comment before I take us out of here. The Panthers need to add at least 2 of these players somehow. Whether that's Kendrick Bourne and Tyler Boyd, I don't care. The Panthers need to go out and add some talent. They're, from a cap perspective, they're in an okay spot. I think they're projecting just under $39 million. Yeah. I think getting one of those running backs could help Bryce. They need to do a lot of things to help Bryce Young. And the full version of every show can be found on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. If you're enjoying the show, make sure you head over there, subscribe over there, leave us a 5-star review or 4-star, but preferably 5-star, and make sure you search Football Guys Dynasty Football Show.